Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning everyone. Welcome again to today's session on the course History of English Language and Literature. In the previous session we began looking at the greatest product of Elizabethan times, William Shakespeare. When we ended the previous lecture, we had begun looking at the vast corpus of works that Shakespeare had produced. So if we try to draw your attention to that again, this is the kind of productions that Shakespeare had produced during his lifetime, with 154 sonnets, 11 tragedies, 17 comedies, 10 historical plays and 4 long poems. However, in today's session we will be taking a look at the tragedies, comedies and history plays as it has been generally classified by critics and historians for a very long time. And this is the set of plays that Shakespeare had produced, and his plays are generally now divided into different genres, and we now also know that for critical convenience, for historical convenience, these classifications are quite necessary, and it also gives a lot of structure to our discussion. And this is something which is part of someone's study on the frequency of performances of Shakespeare's plays. This need not surprise us in any way, because he was a man who dominated the London stage for about 25 years, and that was quite a feat, not just during those times but even in terms of today's standards. And if we try to classify Shakespeare's plays, the first set is in fact his early comedies, and they were generally said to be immature and less original, and there is a lot of dispute about the storylines that he picked up from here and there, from Italian comedies, from the earlier romances, so on and so forth. And they are generally seen as immature because the plot structure is not very profound like the later ones, but nevertheless they were hugely successful as well. And there are these English histories which display the significance of the throne and also a desire for stable government. If we remember, when Shakespeare had entered the dramatic scene in London, Queen Elizabeth was a reigning monarch, and there were a lot of threats to her throne from the Catholic Church and also from many of the other descendants of King Henry VIII. So there was this ongoing tussle for power. There were different warlords who were fighting with each other. There were also these different neighboring states who were trying to get into a marital alliance with Queen Elizabeth. So a lot of instability had overshadowed Queen Elizabeth's reign, and there was a lot of uncertainty over political and economic affairs as well. So this gets reflected in many of Shakespeare's plays, and a general desire for a more stable political economy is also seen in plays. And at a later stage we find his mature comedies in plays where his comic genius is displayed. In fact, he was considered, is still being considered as one of the most profound humorists that the English literature had ever produced, and his wit was considered quite sophisticated, though he had included some kind of slapstick comedy to cater to the groundlings as well. And there were somber plays of a later period which reflected a cynical and disillusioned attitude to life, and also there was a desire to expose the falsity of romance. This is in stark contrast to the earlier kinds of romantic plays where love had taken a profound form in forms of theme, in the forms of plot structure, so on and so forth. And there's also the stage of great tragedies. In fact, tragedies are considered to be Shakespeare's foremost and supremest works, and we also find that this is the kind of work in which we find Shakespeare's art and dramatic technique reaching its climax. And he had a set of plays which are generally designated as Roman plays, mostly historical in nature as well. And here also he expresses a concern for political security through a discussion of the earlier Roman rulers and earlier Roman authorities. And most of his plays of the later years, they display a sense of mellowed maturity, maybe because of the kind of things that had befallen his life. We in the last session we heard about the many kinds of misfortunes, personal misfortunes that had befallen him towards the end of his life, and a lot of deaths which had happened. So maybe this had led him as a person towards a more mellowed, mature personality. Apart from this thematic classification, critics generally divide Shakespeare's plays into 4 major periods. The first phase is from 1588 to 93, second from 1594 to 1600, third from 1601 to 1608, and phase 4 from 1608 to 1612. Here we can also note that politically also this can be classified into 2, because he lived and wrote under 2 different monarchs, Elizabeth I and James I, and he in that sense he can be classified along with Chaucer, because if you remember, Chaucer was the one who had a rare distinction of having lived and written under 3 different monarchs. The first 2 phases were under Queen Elizabeth's rule, and the second 2 phases could be broadly classified as being under James I rule. So if we do a chronological survey of Shakespeare's plays, some of the critics are also of the opinion that one can unearth the intellectual and artistic history of the personality of Shakespeare. However, there is still a lot of debate about whether his own personality, whether his own domestic life, whether his own private life, etc. Get featured in any of his dramas or not. So, keeping that aside, let us move on to the first phase from 1588 to 1593. This is the time when he had arrived in London, and also if you remember in the previous session we also noted that by 1592 he is quite a force to reckon with. He had risen to such an importance that he had begun to even merit abuse from one of the university wits, Robert Greene. So, this is the stage which could be generally understood as experimental in nature, and we find him attempting a revision of many old plays. In fact, the earlier plays, the 3 parts of Henry VI, Titus Andronicus, they are all seen as revision of plays which had already been prevalent in the Elizabethan times. And it is at this stage that we find a profound influence of John Lilly on him, and most of his early comedies are a reflection of John Lilly's influence on his personality and as well as his dramatic technique. And we also find Marlowe's influence in this early stage, especially in his drama Richard III. The play Romeo and Juliet deserves a special mention at this point, because if you remember the chart in which I showed at the outset of this session, which showed the frequency of plays of Shakespeare's times, it showed that Romeo and Juliet had topped the chart. So, this is considered as one of his most successful plays ever, and this youthful tragedy, however, is considered by the critics as having no depth of thought or characterization and superficial in nature and seen as immature. Nevertheless, it continues to be staged in different forms. It has been remade in into different movies in different languages. So, in that sense, it continues to be one of his most popular plays ever. And we also find that the use of blank verse in his early stage, in the first stage, was more stiff, and it was not free as it was supposed to be. And in spite of the many limitations that Shakespeare's dramatic techniques could have had, in fact, there is hardly any confusion about the outstanding technical features that he used in his stage, and this is what made Shakespeare hugely successful right from his early times, because the people who were used to a more or less a monotonous kind of stage techniques were getting used to many different innovative things when Shakespeare arrived. In the second phase, which lasted from 1594 to 1600, this period is seen as quite massive and quite profound, not just in terms of quantity but also in terms of quality. And this is the time when he produced all those great comedies with sophisticated humor and wit, and also had staged a number of chronicle plays. Some of the plays of this period include Richard II, King John, The Merchant of Venice, Henry IV, Henry V, The Taming of the Shrew, The Merry Wives of Windsor, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, and Twelfth Night. In fact, there is this interesting trivia about the production of As You Like It and Twelfth Night. In fact, Shakespeare had this habit of not naming his plays well in advance. In fact, if you look at the title of most of his plays, they're not very dramatic. The title is most often based on the name of the main character, or it could be something like a Twelfth Night. In fact, on about the play Twelfth Night, it was in fact staged on the 12th night after Christmas, which marked the grand finale of all Christmas celebrations in Elizabethan England. So Shakespeare had a special play which he wanted to stage on that particular day. And just before the play was going to be staged, the actors and the others who were part of this realized that the play was not named. So it seems, apparently, as the anecdote goes, apparently they went and asked Shakespeare how to name it, and he said Twelfth Night. We know that this was the casual way in which he named most of his plays, just like the way in which he entered the London dramatic scene in a very casual way, in a rather friendless way, without having planned anything or structured anything in terms of education, in terms of dramatic technique, so on and so forth. We find that his plays were also staged, and his plays were also named and staged in a way which was quite unconventional during that time. But in spite of that, we find him as achieving supreme success in all his work. And by the time he reaches the second phase, we also find his work becoming more independent in nature. And from this time onwards, it's very difficult to trace particular influences or particular kinds of borrowings that he does from different works. And this is also the time when he begins to explore characters in an in-depth analysis, and his humor also takes on a different level altogether. It's more penetrative, it's more satirical, though he always takes a good care not to offend the monarch or whoever is in power. And by this time, his blank verse is no more stiff, it's free and flexible as well. And this prepares him for the third stage from 1601 to 1608, and this is the time of his great tragedies and bitter comedies, and many feel that this is the time when he engages in a lot of philosophical discussions throughout his play, and this is considered as the time when he also reached the peak of his career. And all the supreme masterpieces, the great tragedies, were produced during this time. And he also had began to show a flair for exploring the darker side of human experience, and also his plays look at destructive emotions, sins and weaknesses of men. So there is a gradual transformation that we see in his dramatic career from early mindless comedies towards a more profound exploration of life itself. So these are some of the plays of this time: Julius Caesar, Hamlet, All's Well That Ends Well, Measure for Measure, Troilus and Cressida, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus, and Timon of Athens. So with this phase 4, he in fact, after this we do not find any kind of profound productions coming from his side, and his phase 4 is fairly uneventful in terms of his dramatic career. It's from 1608 to 1612, and this is the stage of later comedies and dramatic romances, and some of them have even named these dramatic romances of the later times as tragicomedies, because there's a mix of both that we find in most of his plays of the later times. And this, some of the critics even feel that there's a steady decline of Shakespeare's dramatic powers. It could be due to many reasons. It could be due to the domestic problems that he had, the grief of the 4 deaths that continuously happened in his family. One does not really know the reason, and it's also said that the fire which burnt down the Globe Theatre during one of his performances of Henry VIII, maybe that also had shaken him up a bit emotionally and financially as well. And in this period, especially the final phase, we find that most of his plays were attacked for careless construction. The characterization was quite unsatisfactory. So we find an expression of these things in works such as Cymbeline, The Tempest, and The Winter's Tale. And towards the end, there's one play that he had left incomplete, Pericles, and another one, Henry VIII, was completed by Fletcher, another contemporary of him at a later point. In fact, Fletcher is the one who takes over most of the things that Shakespeare was doing in his company soon after his death. And what were the significant features of Shakespeare's drama? We find that his work was spread over 4 phases. This lasted for about 25 years, which is almost a life career for a successful person. So, we need to compile a few features from all of these phases together to understand the kind of drama that Shakespeare produced in general. And needless to say, it was of an astonishing variety, range and versatility. And in fact, this is based on one of the studies done on the different kinds of deaths that Shakespeare brought to the stage, and this was found is quite interesting during the Elizabethan times, because they were looking for any kind of innovation, any kind of difference. So, we find that unlike most of the other tragedies which only had 1 or 2 kinds of death, we find him exploring in a variety of ways, even when it comes to the ending of a person. So, moving on, we also find that his works were quite free from dogmatism, which was prevalent during those times, especially due to the various moral forces that operated within the society. We also find him displaying an objective outlook towards society and life in general. Perhaps it's the influence of the general Elizabethan spirit or the influence of Italian humanism. And his characterization was considered very lively. He had the rare distinction of bringing characters alive on stage. In fact, his characters were also considered as more round, and they were never flat. In fact, this is exemplarily shown in the way he showed the characters of monarchs on stage. In fact, if we do a survey of many of his characters who were either Roman rulers or were English kings, we find that they were not devoid of any weakness. In fact, his tragedy is based upon this single flaw that an otherwise flawless perfect character of heroic nature had. So, in that sense, his plays were very interesting because they did not have larger than life figures. The figures were closer to life with real emotions and real weaknesses. And he had an excellent command over language. This goes without saying. Maybe we will spend another lecture looking at the ways in which Shakespeare's language influenced and overturned many linguistic features. His vocabulary is said to have been in the range of 15,000, and it said that Milton had only half that number to his credit. And in fact, many of the phrases and many of the words that we use today, we use it unknowingly that it's all from Shakespeare's plays. In fact, even some very common terms, as we can see over here, like naked truth, or expressions such as love is blind, for goodness sake, brave new world, green-eyed monster, all of those have been invented and innovated by Shakespeare in many of his plays. So, the language in fact owes a lot to Shakespeare, and there is a way in which linguistics have even classified the language in a different way from Shakespeare's time onwards. And his play in fact was written with a mix of prose and verse. Verse, we already noted, it was mostly in blank verse. There was a free and secular expression of blank verse, and prose was used as a vehicle for serious tragedies and also for comic scenes, and this mixture had a very important purpose to serve as well. If he had written his entire play in verse, he would not have been able to cater to a larger set of audience. But verse was mostly seen as courtly, it was seen as scholarly, and it needed some kind of a merit to even understand and appreciate. But prose was the language of the common man, so his plays were structured in such a way that it could cater to the interests of both the commoners as well as the people of learned and scholarly background. And there is a lot of debate about the way his women characters have been portrayed. For some time, there was this general appreciation of Shakespeare's characterization of women, that he had strong and unconventional characters, and it was not the typical dependent weak women of Elizabethan drama. And he is also said to have questioned certain kinds of stereotypes, though not always. There are different debates, especially in the contemporary feminist studies. We do find that many studies have begun to look at the patriarchal side of the bard and critiquing the ways in which he had been talking about gender, he had been representing women, so on and so forth. But at the same time, there are characters such as Lady Macbeth who were not portrayed in drama or any kind of literary art until then. And he did engage in, though in minor ways, with issues of patriarchy, women's role in marriage, women's intellect and abilities, so on and so forth. And some detailed discussion we would also find in plays such as You Like It and 12th Night. But however, keeping these various debates and controversies apart, he is said to have been explored human emotions and human lives in many varied ways and many myriad ways than the others of his times could do. And some of the critiques of Shakespeare's plays include that they were hasty productions, because as we noted in the earlier session, he was quite often in a hurry to stage the plays. He did not even have time to write down the script or name them properly and execute them. But they were hasty productions because the plays were so much in demand, and he wanted to make use of this popularity while it was still there. And the plays were in fact immensely designed for stage, which is why the positive side of this being his plays are even now adapted into different kinds of movies. It is possible to adapt Shakespeare's plays in different kinds of stages. It's primarily because Shakespeare designed his plays for the stage. He was not concerned about the literary nuances, but he was more concerned about how the play would appear when it was staged over there. And though maybe this was a reflection of his anxiety for success, but we do find that it did produce a lot of theatrical effect. So in certain cases, we even find him willing to sacrifice some inconsistencies, and there are also a lot of instances of anachronism in Shakespeare's plays. But in spite of that, we find that the theatrical effect continues to be of supreme nature. And he always included some scenes to cater to the groundlings. The groundlings were the one who had to pay just a penny to watch the drama, and they had to be, they were not given particular seats. They had to sit on the ground and watch the play. So he wanted to cater to the groundlings as well, because they ensured that the drama was hugely popular. So he had always included some body scenes, some comic slapstick scenes to cater to their interest and also bring drama closer to their own lives. And about the originality of Shakespeare's play, there are a lot of debates and controversies and even authorship studies about the same. And some feel that, especially the earlier historians and critics like Hudson, they are of the opinion that he took no trouble to be original, and that he borrowed freely from older plays and other sources without acknowledging them in any way. But this is not a view shared by all the critics and all the historians. And in fact, Pat Rogers is of the opinion that he owed less than usual to his sources, and he transmuted what he found into entirely new substances. So apart from these varied ways, what stands as a true testimony to his craft and his technique is that he continues to be celebrated even after centuries. He is perhaps the most widely read and most widely known literary artist, and his plays are perhaps the most staged worldwide, even in the contemporary. And it's usually said about him that he was the one who took a lot of pleasure in breaking theatrical illusions. In fact, his famous phrase from one of his plays, "All the world's a stage," is an expression and a reflection of this belief that he had. This also reminds us that we need to take a closer look at Elizabethan theatre to understand how the theatre was not just an artistic construct, but it was also a social construct and a political construct of the times. So in the next session, we will be taking a detailed look at how Elizabethan theatre was being framed, the physical structure of it, how it contributed to the revenue of the times, and how it became an important symbol of Elizabethan times and later on the English times in general. So with this, we wind up today's lecture. Thank you for listening, and see you in the next class.